the level of training and the level of sophistication of these agents is very poor. In fact, I was speaking with a very senior officer in the Illinois State Police who were on scene, who've been trying to control the situation in Chicago and near Chicago. And this officer, who is 30 years or better of law enforcement experience, told me these guys aren't law enforcement officers, they're cowboys.
Hello and welcome to the Trump Report. I'm Louis Sykes. Today we're delighted to be joined by Major General William Enyart, the former Adjutant General of the Illinois National Guard and a former US Congressman. He's also author of several books, including Leadership in Challenging Times. Bill, thank you very much for joining us today.
Great to be with you today, Louis.
Well, there's a wide range of topics I'm keen to ask your expertise on, but I wanted to start with your thoughts on what we've seen unfold in Minneapolis over the last few days.
Well, this is an incredible tragedy, and certainly I think that it could be foreseen. We have had something on the order of about 14 shootings by ICE agents. And including shootings in Chicago, here in Illinois, in my home state, and the level of training and the level of sophistication of these agents is very poor. In fact, I was speaking with a very senior officer in the Illinois State Police who were on scene, who've been trying to control the situation in Chicago and near Chicago. And this officer, who is 30 years or better of law enforcement experience, told me these guys aren't law enforcement officers, they're cowboys. So that was a really damning indictment of these folks from this very senior law enforcement officer. I've watched virtually all the video clips that are available, and it appears to me that perhaps her SUV did brush this officer, this agent, but he was clearly not injured. He clearly pushed himself right back from the SUV, unholstered his weapon, and at least two of the shots that he fired were well after the SUV had gotten past him. He fired right into the passenger side window, so he was in no danger whatsoever at that point. So this is a clear misuse of police authority.
And Tim Walz, the Minnesota governor, has also noted that the FBI investigation might well be blocking local law enforcement from conducting their own stateside investigation. That seems like quite an unusual thing to happen, where US investigative agencies aren't just collaborating on these issues. How out of the ordinary does that seem?
Well, that is quite out of the ordinary. Virtually all of the law enforcement agencies, and we have multiple law enforcement jurisdictions here in the states. We have the city, we have county, we have state, and then we have the feds. So really, you've got at least four layers. And typically, they all cooperate in these investigations. They all work together because they have different levels of expertise. And particularly with the locals, they have contacts in the local community that the feds could never hope to get. And so the cooperation of these agencies is critical. When I was the Adjutant General or Commanding General of the Illinois National Guard, we frequently interacted with all of those levels of agency. When the NATO conference was held in Chicago back in 2012, at that point, it was the largest NATO conference ever held in the world. It was the largest special security event ever held outside the Washington, D.C. area. And I had 4,000 National Guard troops there assisting in the security. And we worked with the Coast Guard, the FBI, the Secret Service, as well as the Chicago Police Department, Cook County, and the Illinois State Police. It was an all-hands effort. We all worked together. And it was a very successful, incident-free conference. So this happens frequently in law enforcement in the United States, and for the Minnesota Bureau of Investigation, I'm not sure their correct title, but the Minnesota State Police to be banned from assisting in this is quite frankly ridiculous, and all it's going to do is detract from any credibility of this investigation.
And Minnesota Governor Tim Walz has also authorized the state's National Guard to help support local law enforcement as we see more protests coming on the back of this shooting. What sort of role might they be playing then? Because especially for a European audience, it can be a little tricky to unpick who is in command of which authorities sometimes when it comes to the state and federal levels of authority in these cases.
Well, it's not just Europeans. It's folks here in the States don't really understand the differences between the National Guard and the active duty forces and the Army Reserve and so on. But the National Guard, we like to say that the National Guard wears two hats. They can only wear one hat at a time, though. They own two hats, but they can only wear one hat. The one hat is when they're under the command of the state. All right, so that's your state hat. And if you are placed under federal orders, then you're wearing your federal hat. You cannot wear two hats at the same time. So what the governor is doing is placing those National Guard soldiers under state control. Now, that does not prohibit the president from assuming federal control of them. But at this point, what he has done is placed them under state orders. And the National Guard is a multi-purpose force. I like to call it a Swiss Army knife, if you will. They have two missions. One mission is to act as a trained, ready military reserve for the United States Army or Air Force, as the case may be. And their other role is to act as a trained, ready force for the governor. Principally, when the governor activates them, it tends to be for natural disasters, earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, forest fires, that sort of thing. So it's a heavy lift force that a ready source of manpower that the governor can activate. And the great thing about the National Guard is that it's only paid when it's on duty. More than 90% of these folks are part-timers, and they typically work one weekend a month and a couple of weeks in the summer for training or more. But they are part-time soldiers. They have jobs. They're farmers. They're lawyers. They're doctors. They're mechanics, and so on. And then they have their military occupational specialties, whether it's infantry, armor, artillery, or truck drivers or cooks or medics. So they run the full spectrum of military specialties as well. And what the governor is doing here, one of the reasons that the state does occasionally call folks up is when there is the prospect of a civil disturbance. And those National Guard soldiers, although they're not trained in law enforcement, they do receive some training in crowd control and that sort of thing, and they support the police. Also, they have many military specialties that are of great assistance to the police. As I mentioned, truck drivers, MPs, and cooks and logistics specialists. So all of those can assist police when the crowds get out of control or get unruly. And the local authorities have deemed it's necessary to seek assistance. So what the governor, in my opinion, is doing here is foreclosing the president from declaring an emergency here of law enforcement. And by bringing the Minnesota Guard online, what he's doing is providing additional support to the local authorities.
And we are now hearing that two more people have been shot, perhaps not killed, in Portland by border agents. That again is likely separate, from my understanding, is a separate agency to ICE. But it is this use of federal authority which seems to be causing a lot of upset in the states at the moment. Speaking to the Senate Judiciary Committee last October, you said that the US is one trigger pull away from another Kent State tragedy. Now, I should say that was discussing the use of National Guard troops, not any federal authority. But do you think the events in Minnesota over the last few days have brought us closer to that sort of situational threat?
Well, clearly, this misuse of federal authority in Minneapolis is ratcheting up the tension level. And when you ratchet up the tension level, it greatly increases the possibility of something untoward happening. Uh, those ICE agents who are unfortunately dressed as soldiers, and I fear that people too often don't understand the difference. You see somebody in a uniform carrying a military grade weapon, you think they're automatically a soldier, and I think that creates adverse implications for the National Guard as well as the active duty military. But clearly, those folks are carrying automatic rifles. And if they mistake the selector switch and it's on full automatic instead of being on semi-automatic, that is where you have to pull the trigger each time to fire a round. Uh, if those are on fully automatic and they fire a burst from one of those military grade weapons, you're going to see a lot of people possibly killed and certainly severely injured. Those are very powerful weapons.
Yes, and it has been a busy 2025, and it looks like it'll be a busy 2026 for the United States Guardsmen across all states. They were deployed to Portland last year. That deployment was only wound down over Christmas, as far as we can see. Do you worry that this flare up in Portland, in Minneapolis, and in other places could result in more deployments in 2026 of the National Guard?
Well, it certainly could. Now the United States Supreme Court just recently issued a decision on their emergency docket where they let stand a lower court decision. It was both a U.S. District Court, the trial level court, and then the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, which covers the Chicago area, where they allowed it to stand that Trump could not, that he had improperly deployed the guard and could not deploy the guard there. So there is that court decision. That court decision, however, only applies in the states covered by the Seventh Circuit, which is essentially the upper Midwest. Now, and I don't want to bore you too much with legal details here, but there is a little bit of an impediment there, and there were a couple of points in that ruling by the Supreme Court that, in my opinion, was firing a shot across the bow of the Trump administration's misuse of the military in domestic situations. But I certainly believe that it's entirely possible that the Trump administration, and not just possible, but likely, that the Trump administration will send either active duty military forces or National Guard forces into these cities where you see these protests.
And I wonder if I can ask, you yourself have been a congressman and have worked, in U.S. lawmaking. For those in the U.S. government who are looking to limit the deployment of further federal agencies, the military, National Guard, what are the kind of options you can see open here to challenge these decisions by the White House?
Well, you're really talking about two different situations. One is the foreign situation, the international situation. The other is domestic. And in fact, both the Senate and the House are at least looking at and attempting to rein in the administration internationally. There will be a war powers resolution restricting the president from using forces in Venezuela go to the floor of the Senate for a vote next week. And the House is likewise considering that type of legislation. So what I find interesting there, and what I think may begin to apply in the domestic situation also, is that there were several Republicans who crossed over to vote with the Democrats. The Republicans do, as I'm sure you know, control both the House of Representatives and the United States Senate, as well as the presidency, and certainly named the majority of justices to the Supreme Court. So essentially, they control all the branches of government. But several of those Republicans have crossed over to vote with Democrats to limit President Trump's powers internationally. That may well also be sending a message to the administration that you need to be careful about what you're doing here. Congress does control the power of the purse, although the administration has certainly been subverting that constitutional restriction over the last year by moving funds, and in his first administration, likewise, moved funds without the express authorization of Congress.
So it sounds like for a lot of key decisions on this, we are looking ahead to the midterms as we are with a lot of U.S. politics at the moment. Then,
Well, I think that the midterm will certainly have an impact. I think based on everything we're seeing at this point, it looks as though the Democrats will certainly gain at least enough seats to overtake the majority in the House of Representatives, which would mean that Hakeem Jeffries, who's the minority leader at the moment, would become the Speaker of the House, and he would control the agenda of the House. You know, President Trump told a gathering of Republicans that they have to keep control of the House of Representatives because he believes he will be impeached again should the Democrats take control. And I would say that's probably a pretty safe bet. And I think it's certainly a legitimate concern on the part of the president. The question is whether or not there would be enough votes in the Senate to convict him. And that would require a huge sweep by the Democrats, which is unlikely. So while he might be impeached, that simply then sends it to the Senate for a trial as to whether or not he should be removed from office.
and we mentioned a moment ago there, Bill, some of the overseas and international developments uh, this week. I'm keen to discuss with you some of those big deployments. Obviously, the one that is looms large in everyone's mind at the moment is the U.S. operation in Venezuela and that raid on Caracas, leading to the capture of President Maduro. What did you make of that operation, and does it change things for you in the way that perhaps the U.S. Seems to be viewed or operate on the world stage?
Well, I think that internationally, it clearly had a very adverse impact on the view of the United States. It's been condemned by virtually every European leader. I think that it gives cover to Putin and to Xi for their ongoing expeditions. Xi has yet to launch anything against Taiwan, but I think that ratchets that possibility up. It certainly appears that this was in violation of the UN Charter. It was a violation of the sovereignty of Venezuela. I don't think there's any question about that. And I think that it's probably a violation of U.S. law too. And the Trump administration has had a hard time figuring out what their basis for this is. They started out attacking speedboats and sinking and killing people in the Caribbean, claiming it's because they're narco terrorists. But then the president goes on television and says, "Well, it's all about oil, or it's all about Maduro's a bad guy." And there's no question Maduro's a bad guy. The drug question is certainly an interesting question because the drugs that are killing people in the United States, that drug is not cocaine, which is what's coming out of Venezuela, but rather fentanyl, which is the precursors come from China and then are manufactured into fentanyl in Mexico and come up through Mexico. So none of the explanations thus far really hold water.
Yes, and on oil, we've of course seen that raid on Caracas followed up with the seizure of two vessels, the MT Sophia tanker seized in or near the Caribbean, and the Marinara, which had changed its name while traveling towards Venezuela, and then flagged itself as a Russian vessel before being seized in the North Atlantic in an operation that the British forces appear to have been involved with as well. How should we read those seizures? And more importantly, how might America's adversaries that you've mentioned there, Russia and China, see this?
Well, the oil probably was bound for China. Those vessels have been known to transport Russian oil, which is, of course, embargoed. And I would think that they will certainly look a bit askance at these seizures. If these seizures continue, where the administration is seizing the so-called black fleet or undercover fleet of tankers that have been shipping Russian oil against international sanctions, would clearly have a very adverse effect on the Russian economy, which is largely supported at this point by their sale of oil. So it's certainly going to have an impact on Russia. China, interestingly enough, has billions of dollars of Venezuelan oil under contract, and it'll be interesting to see how China reacts to Trump's speaking of running Venezuela and seizing Venezuelan oil, and he personally is going to administer the funds from the sale of this oil on the open market rather than it going to China, which had contracted for it. So I think we're just at the beginning of an international crisis here.
Well, Bill, we will continue to watch that keenly and hopefully come back to you for more on this story internationally and some of those national stories we've discussed here today. Major General William Enyart, the former Adjutant General of the Illinois National Guard, former U.S. Congressman, and also the author of Leadership in Challenging Times. Thank you very much for joining me today on the Trump Report.
Louis, it's great to be with you, and I hope that I've been able to provide a little insight into the complexities of U.S. law and some of the issues here in the States.